and the company are there, just running down the steps. Okay, I have a little paper here, which I'm supposed to read, but I think I should not. We have an interesting seminar today, and that's the reason why, even in the morning, I was thinking I'll go ahead and do a virtual participation by going on KSIConnect and having typed all my questions, interacting with you. I thought that this is a very important seminar, that I should be here personally to first introduce Padma and to introduce the work that she's doing, and also in a very enthusiastic way say that this is a start of the strategic research on gender, start of the continuation, which was actually done and commenced in 1992-1993 when Padma, I think she was 20 years old at that time, came to ICRISAT, newly graduate, a gold medalist from Angrao, and joined the team of Ramadevi, G.V. Rangarao, and formed the gender team. And she, as a young graduate, she's not a scientist. She was assistant to the scientist at that time as RA. We call them as RA at that time. And I watched her grow. And as she grew, she became, in a fast way, mature in terms of research. And as soon as she got out of the wing of her boss, she flew and continued interacting with the team that she was working before, including GV and the rest, and then worked with me to continue the work on gender. And several years ago, I said this is time for her to write up her thesis, which she has been doing from the very beginning of the time that she joined ICRISAT. In other words, as an RA, she collected data. She started analyzing the data, and then got a very, very interesting topic, which is in the frontier of social science research, which at that time we were very, very lucky because we were revitalizing the VLS, and we have a professor from Oxford University, Pramila Krishnan, and another head of department of Yale University, or Harvard at the time, Mark Rosenzweig, who said that if we are to revive the VLS, one aspect of work that we should not miss in reviving it is social networks, which, as a very young researcher at that time, Padma said, that's what I'll do for my PhD. So we supported her to go to IIT Bombay. She got a leave to do her PhD. And I was very surprised. In 4 months' time, in 1 semester time, which is 4 months, she finished all her coursework with flying colors. And I don't know what she did. She did not sleep, I think, during those 4 months. Because for a PhD work, you actually spend years to do your coursework. But she did that in 1 semester. And then come back, in fact, reported back to ICRISAT to do her scientific officer work, and then write up her thesis. And indeed, very few months ago, in January, we actually had her thesis done. She did her Bible, again with flying colors, with recommendation to be the best thesis award at IIT Bombay. So with that encouragement, aside from letting her write and publish her thesis in high-impact journals, I said, you should now have a series of seminars. And this is the first one of them, and I'm asking her to promise a whole series. And so without further ado, I'll give you Padmaja to give the highlights of work, not only of her thesis, but continuing work on gender, social networks, which will now be applied in a new area of research that we will do at ICRISAT on nutrition and gender. Padma.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am, for the
Perhaps
nice.
I should say, sorry, Padma, I introduced her as a young girl. Now she's no longer a young girl.
She's a mother of a
And in
young.
fact, she has matured as well as grown in ICRISAT. Is an exemplar of a scientist who has come from very young and early in her career, who grew in ICRISAT, and now with the recognition of the DG as well, the management and the board of ICRISAT, she has been appointed as scientist for gender research at ICRISAT. Padma.
Thank you, ma'am, for the nice introduction. And I think most of you all who are here today know about me. They have seen me grow here. Thank you all for coming for this seminar. And as madam said, I'm no longer a young girl, but a mother of a young girl. So I have a 15-year-old daughter, and you can see that every day we are at war. So that's normal. So now I'll start my presentation. But before I do that, I have a small introduction. So good afternoon, everybody. And I will be presenting on one of the major critical focus areas identified by ICRISAT in our strategy and business plan, and that is the focus on gender. Now, of concern to ICRISAT is to identify gender gaps, potential gender gaps that can be associated with market-oriented development. And I take this opportunity to discuss some insights, some findings. Only I'll give you a flavor of the findings and the observations that I've had with my association with VDSA and my own analysis on gender and social networks, and see how this added dimension on gender from a network's perspective will help us in applying or bringing about the IMOD, inclusive market oriented development. So here is my presentation, which says mapping the social network architecture of rural communities. And Padmaja and gender go together. So there is a focus on gender, there is a focus on technology, and this is in the semi-arid tropics of India. Before whenever I present on the social network architecture, I use this quote from Freeman, which says, there are the 3 points that are in bold, that is interdependence, the links, and how these links have important consequences for everybody, and how these links provide people either opportunities or constraints on their behavior. I have two pictures over here. On the left side, you can see I have captured this picture on my camera, which is actually a photograph of one farmer in Kanzara with Dr. Jim Ryan when he was in charge, when he was in ICRISAT undertaking the VLS. Now this picture, even though it is just a representation, you can see how the farmer with his association with Dr. Jim Ryan, who is an institution in himself, who's an organization and an individual, how that links or that association will actually have impacted him. He was one of the early innovators in taking up some of our ICRISAT technologies, even though there was no government support. And that's how you can see that how these links can actually provide opportunities for individuals. On the right hand side, on the contrary, I show you a picture of the tribal farmers in Umra village in Maharashtra, and you can see them interacting with the landowning class male farmers in the village. Now the binding constraint, that once that constraint was lifted, you can see in this picture, from the picture you can see the aggressive, so that actually shows the constraints they had. And once those constraints were lifted, you can see a kind of a social revolution happening in the village. So just to give you a flavor and set the ground of what I would be presenting, I have taken this quote by Freeman. And again, linking it with IMOD. IMOD, the DG keeps telling IMOD, and the more you think about IMOD and in your research, you feel, yes, there is a linkage. You can connect your theory, your practice, your applications to the IMOD approach. And IMOD, the very characteristic of IMOD is the I, that is the inclusiveness. And that's what the network perspective actually helps us to bring in. You look at social actors, then their interactions, and how these interactions can actually shape. It can help shape the role of markets, the formal and informal institutions, and how these can bring about gender equality. Now, this gender equality will again, help in improving or providing economic opportunities, resources. It will enhance the agency and lead to development, which is a vicious cycle, and more development will lead to more equality. And that's what IMOD is all about, inclusive market oriented development, right? So this, from a networks lens also, if you see, you can very well understand IMOD and how it fits into our strategy and plan. Having said that, with the background, I now just tell you, I would be giving you a little introduction about the study, then go on the methodology, briefly about the methodology, and then results and discussion. That's where I'll spend maximum time, and then conclusions and how I intend to move forward in this strategic research on gender and social networks. So the introduction, what is my study all about? My study is all about understanding social structure. Why do we need to understand social structure? We are in an agricultural research organization. Why do we need to understand social structure? Because social structure, that is the base. It is the substratum that underlies all our social life and history. And when we say social structure, we are looking at the multidimensional space of different individuals in different positions in the society, either as individuals or collectively, and how these impact on development, how these impact on the different outcomes. So, if you have to study social structure, I looked at one of the theories, and that is the social network theory. Again, this is a methodological and a theoretical enhancement that we are bringing into the VLS, where the focus on the social structure is through a system of relations, understanding the system of the relationships, how these relationships are organized, and how this patterning actually affects the outcomes, the behaviors of individuals, the society, and the community and the nation state as a whole. So it's very important to understand social structure. Therefore, having said that I am studying social structure, I also would like to say what are the uniqueness of this study. Why is this study so different from the other studies that we are doing, and what is the enhancement we are bringing to VLS, and how this enhancements can actually help in ICRISAT research. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The first one, which I have not put here, but I have said Q square, is using quantitative and qualitative analysis. Even in data collection, we are using quantitative and qualitative approaches. So the qualitative approaches complement the quantitative approaches. And then you are looking at the effect of the network, not the strength or the weakness of a network. You can know the weakness or the strength of a network. Many studies are there which look at the strength or weakness of the network. But here we are looking at the effect of the network, and it is situated in the harsh semi-arid tropics. The focus is on gender and technology. And another methodological enhancement is studying whole networks. Usually when people are studying networks or when they are doing social network analysis, they take a sample or a subsample of population. But because of the unique nature, because of the VLS, and because we have the rapport with the people, we have the continuous engagement with the VLS rural communities, studying whole networks was the best idea, the best way to understand everything about the interactions and the patterning of the society. And as Dr. Bantlin in her introduction itself has said, the seeds for this study were actually sown in from my previous experiences where I worked on groundnut production technology to look at how this technology has impacted men and women and what were the constraints, and how once the constraints were lifted, it led to adoption of the technology and ultimately to empowerment of both men and women. Empowerment not only economic in terms of incomes and yields, but also in terms of social and environmental benefits as well. And during this study, when we were undertaking the study, we realized that people were coming together, they were forming groups, which led to the adoption of the technology. And this led to this study on mapping the social network architecture to understand why do people come together as groups, what are their motivations for coming together as groups, and once they form a group, how does this group actually affect the outcomes. So that's where the study is all about. And this is situated in 2 villages. I have done this study. We have done this study in 2 villages. Both are in the semi-arid tropics. So there is a common thread, that is the semi-arid tropics. But Aurepalle is in a more drought-prone area. That is, it is in the district of Mehboob-Nagar, but also near to an urban center where you can see the economic growth is happening now fast. Kanzara, on the other hand, falls under a relatively more assured rainfall region, and you can see the pathway of development for Kanzara is through intensification of agriculture. So there is intensification of agriculture in Kanzara, there is diversification and new opportunities and new avenues in Aurepalle. So this provides a very good example of where, though both are situated in the same risky environment of the semi-arid tropics, you can see how the networks operate at different level and how the effect of the networks is. So what are the different outcomes of these networks? So as I've already said, since we were studying whole networks, what we have done is we have done a census of the village where each and every individual above 14 years of age has been interviewed, and we have collected detailed information from them about the relationships and the networks that they are doing, the links they are having. Complementing that with the gender analysis and social analysis tools to understand, to actually get the descriptive analysis, as well as tapping the multi-generational data of the VDSA to be able to understand why this is happening. So three types of transactions. We focused on three different types of transactions, that is the economic transactions, the socio-cultural, political, information related transactions, and the third one is the technology related transactions. And we backed up this, complemented this quantitative data with descriptive or qualitative data. So the questions that we asked were like, who interacts with whom? How do these networks operate? What is the outcome? How do the networks affect the outcome? And does it mean that the well-connected ones are the well-off ones? What does it mean? So we answer. And mind you, it's a very difficult questionnaire, though it is just a one page, it looks very simple, but collecting this data was very difficult because you have to go and interview each and every individual in the village. And the sample size for this study was about 1800 or 1900 individuals in Kanzara, in Aurepalle, and about 1100 individuals in Kanzara. So that you can see almost 3000 individuals were interviewed, and we collected data from 3000 individuals. And I should really thank the investigators who have helped me in collecting this data, as well as our data entry teams who have inputted this data, because it was a very complex data that was collected. So before I actually go into the discussion and the findings from my study, I would like to say that we have looked at the network mapping the architecture in three different steps. In the first step, we look at the village as a whole and see what kind of pattern or network emerges. And then we focus on a random sample of households which we identify from the step one, that is the village networks. And then we go down to the individual level also, which we identify from the step two, to see what are the key issues in network analysis and understanding the relationships. So that's how we have gone about. And so I present the discussions by saying a new way to see using the network lens. I have clubbed my discussion points into 4 groups. So the first set of discussion points actually are focused, are more methodological, more theoretical, in the senses this study was studying whole networks. Now the studying whole networks actually help us to trace the information flows in all directions. How do this information affect the behaviors and attitudes and the relationships in different settings? The second, looking at the theory of social network itself as a structural approach. And thirdly, the focus on gender. So I've clubbed these 3 discussion points into one group. Now here are my findings or my results. Now from this map, you can see this is an architecture of the village for economic transactions. Now when I say economic transactions, it is buying land, selling land, hiring labor, borrowing money, lending money, etc. Now on the right hand side, your left hand side, that is Kanzara, if you can see a village in a more assured rainfall region and who shows promise in agriculture, you can see that the network architecture, if you cut it into 2 parts, you can see that there is a core and then there is a periphery over here. Now the core is where you can see the hubs or the focal nodes. You can identify those as the hubs or the focal nodes. And my analysis actually showed that these hubs or the focal nodes actually are people who had links with other networks, who had links not only within the village but outside the village, who are people who belong to certain caste groups or certain class groups, etc. These were the focal nodes, and you could see very strong focal nodes or points emerging in Kanzara. Aurepalle, on the contrary, if you can see, it's a more spread out network. You can see a lot of focal points and nodes in this network, meaning that the information flow is more even in this village. It does not grow to only a selected group of individuals or organization, but it is spread throughout the village. And the degree centrality. The degree centrality means the number of links an individual can have with other individuals or organization in and outside the village. And you can see in Aurepalle, the number of ties was very high compared to Kanzara. Even though the range in Kanzara was about 2 to 85, on an average you could see that each individual had about like 11 to 14 interactions with other individuals. But in Aurepalle, it was much more, and you could see that there were more reciprocal ties in Aurepalle. Similarly, mapping the socio-cultural political transactions in the two villages, the network maps actually, here again you can see a difference. Kanzara, which is more in agriculture, you can see that again, like before, there is more crowding in the core. But in this case, for the socio-cultural political transactions, the hubs are not on caste or class lines. The individuals have different characteristics, they have different attributes, and the reasons why they became. They are the ones, the individuals who hold a favored position in the network. That means they have high informal power, not formal power, but informal power, because they might be the ones who are cutting across many networks, and that's where they show they know what is moving in the network, what is the information flowing in the network. So that is the kind of hubs for the socio-cultural transactions in Kanzara. Whereas in Aurepalle, if you can see, it is more scattered, and access to urban centers, education actually has helped or is bringing about a change in the cultural norms. People of Aurepalle have become more open with more information available, more infrastructure, more access to nearby centers. You can see that their outlook towards life has changed, and that is one of the reasons where you can see that the network, the hubs, you can see there are many hubs, and it's not like crowding in the center. So that's an important observation for us. Now, whether we get the similar kind of observation for other villages, we need to see, and how we can use this information for introducing a new intervention or for bringing about a policy change is what we need to consider. Now, after the village, I said we went to the household. Now, this is an example of a household in Kanzara who belongs to a nomadic tribe, but who is one of the hub or the focal point. In sociology, we also call them as the structural wholes, because these people are the ones who connect to different networks, not only within their clusters or networks, but they connect to different networks. And if you can see in this network of an individual, I have the legend here, the circles mean the men, the triangles are the women, and the color code. You can see that this household in general has quite a lot of links with the outside the village. So they have good links, good interactions with people outside the village, the organizations outside the village, and that's a source of information, that's a source of innovation for this household. That's what I want you to remember here. Contrasting this, take another household. This is a household headed by a woman who belongs to an SC community in Kanzara. And if you can see again, you can see all her connections are within the village and mostly with her own caste group. That's what my analysis told me. Very few connections like outside the village. You can hardly see this except one or two. You can hardly see any connections outside the village. That means they know what they know, others also know. So here is an example where though you can see that the bonds and the reciprocity norms of trust and reciprocity are high, you can see that this is one potential case where information flow, innovation, source of innovation is very minimal. Having done villages, households, then we go to groups, and here I would look at gender, and this is an example. Again, you can see this this is the network map of a sample women, and this is the network map of a sample men in Kanzara, both into agriculture. An interesting point over here, if you can see, is that you can see three clusters emerging over here, And these clusters again have small networks that is based on caste here again, and these are again connected by some connectors, which we again call the innovators or people who actually bring new information to this group. But on a whole, if you see this network of these three parts is connected by three individuals, three women from the village. And these women actually are the women who hold informal power in the village. They may not be having power, political power, but they are the ones who hold informal power. And they are the ones who bring about this whole bringing the women together, making them come together, and how this collective behavior and action helps them to improve themselves. And this is more so especially because Kanzara is more focused into agriculture. You can see that they use this information for spread of new technology. On the contrary, the men in Kanzara, you can see it's a more well connected network, and the information flows easily and freely, unlike the women. Now look at Aurepalle, the same by gender again. Again, Aurepalle men, very much similar to Kanzara men, but you can see the emergence of big, high informal power. Lot of people here who have informal power. Also, you can see open ends. That means they still would welcome information from outside, so they get information from outside. It is not closed like in Kanzara, but this is a more open network. Now, Aurepalle, see a very interesting pattern over here. Even though Aurepalle has been witnessing economic growth because of its closeness to the urban center and because of the government programs and policies, you can still see that there is a section of women who are excluded. Though majority of the women are connected, you can see that there is a section of women who are excluded. Now, what prevents these women from joining the groups is what we need to study further. So even though you have similar settings, you can see still, in spite of all the advancements in Aurepalle in terms of growth, you can still see that there are some women who are not included. So what is it that makes them excluded from the community is what we need to research further, and then see how policy support or how even knowledge or new information can bring about the change from exclusion to inclusion. The second set of discussion points I have is looking at the evolution of networks through mentoring and looking at dependency relations and dependency networks. Now, before we actually went about collecting network data, we actually wanted to see whether there are any formal or informal organizations and institutions existing in the village. And this graph actually shows that yes, there are formal and informal organizations existing in the village, but you can see that in Aurepalle it is more diverse compared to Kanzara. Going to the next slide. Now this is where actually you can find a very interesting picture and a very interesting aspect. Look at Aurepalle, this graph. Okay? How many? Okay, so I have 10 more minutes. Okay. Look at this graph, and you can see a number of networks operating in this village, and they have started at different points of time. Whereas in Kanzara, you can see that there is only this one network which started very early in 1954, but then that's the only network which is still going strong. You had, after about 3 decades, I think so, you had 2 networks coming in, but then they have collapsed or are not functioning very well. Now, what is the reason for this? Again, that is the uniqueness of VLS. It actually helps you to go down back into history to identify, understand why this is happening. And here we observed that in Aurepalle, when the caste group association was formed, and then subsequently later, a couple of years later, when the self-help groups were formed, that time it was called the Indira Gandhi Patakam, when the government officials came and said that, okay, can you come and form into groups, then these women took up the challenge and they went to the Raitu Mitra groups and the caste groups to say, how are you forming your networks? How are you able to sustain your networks? They learned the lessons, the failures from there. And that is how these two groups started mentoring the groups. So the mentoring, because of mentoring, you can see that there is the evolution of different networks, diverse networks in Aurepalle. Such kind of a mentoring was not seen or observed in Kanzara. Right? Now it's not just the mentoring, but you also notice dependency still. Dependency, I am depending on somebody, that means that other person has power on me. Like it's a source dependency of one person on another means a source of power. And in spite of Aurepalle experiencing lot of economic growth, you have the self-help groups doing very well in Aurepalle, you have more banks around the village nearer to the urban center, you see that the money lender continues to be important. Even today, the money lender continues to be important in Aurepalle. Now, why is it that when people have so many opportunities to get credit, why is it that the money lender continues to be important? And one of the reasons was that the dependency on the money lender is because of certain tactics he applies and because of certain premiums he gives to the people. Now, the premiums are in terms of the information that he has because of his association with other people outside the village, especially the banks and the other officials. And you can see how many people approach him. This is the money lender, and you can see how many approach him. The premiums he gives is that when they need money, banks will need some collateral. Even in a self-help group, they can get a maximum of 10,000 only. But when they need money more than that, here comes the money lender to their rescue. He has employed certain taxes. He has employed certain practices which actually make the people of Aurepalle get credit much more easier. So even though he is not a source of power, but he holds lot of informal power, and that what makes him still going strong in the village, and he continues to be important. He gives them loan, he gives loan to the people, and then he connects them to the traders, he connects them to the input dealers so that they can buy the inputs from the input dealer, they can sell their produce to the trader so that he gets his money back on time, and they also get their money off, they also get the loan when they need it the most. So that's why this relationships, this structure of relationships and the tactics and the practices that the money lender has employed actually makes him still going strong in the village, and he's a good source of credit for the villagers. Now the third set of discussion pointers are on the formation of networks, the SAT environment, and also technology adoption. So summarizing this, I will not go into all this, but you can see that SHGs are very successful on Aurepalle, and you can see that there were 53 when I was collecting my data, and they have helped women empower themselves. Now, how did they help women empower themselves? Though I have listed a lot, I would like to actually point to this. Having a positive thinking on the ability to make change. The coming together of women itself was a big achievement for them. And when they came together and when they started interacting with each other, the positive thinking that they developed actually helped them to make the change. And you can see here is the leader of a self-help group and who has so many connections, not only the women but also men, as well as the boxes are the organizations. So you see so many people come to her, they have ties with her. Now this woman is actually, she became a leader not because of her class status, not because of her caste status, but purely the leadership skills that she had and the motivation and the motivation to see, to help her, and first of all come out of poverty, and then see that other women in the village and the surrounding villages also come out of poverty. So an important again finding is that leadership is a very important, leadership plays a very important role in mentoring networks and bringing about more change through the formation of networks and finally affecting the outcomes. This is all what I have already said. But a point, not everything is rosy, as you know, there are some concerns also, and the most important concern for women to network is time. That is the biggest constraint they have to time. So when we are planning new policies or when we are planning of an intervention or bringing about a change, we need to consider this. How can we overcome that constraint? How can we overcome the constraint of time that women have? How do we factor in this while we are formulating our policies or designing new interventions, or saying that through the self-help group we can actually give another intervention to them? So how does it burden the self-help group? How does it impact on the women? So we need to consider that. And the last one is to look at technology adoptions and social networks. Again, as I have said, this I would like to focus here on Kanzara, where you can say that the information spread is mostly through the kinships. That's what the findings from the study say. And the early adopters or the innovators were the ones who had those bridging ties were able to bring in new information, and this spread throughout the village. So even though the cropping pattern in Kanzara is changing from a cotton, where cotton was grown for decades, it has now shifted to soybean. You can see that pigeon pea continues to have an important role in the cropping pattern, and especially for home consumption as well for their own subsistence. And you can see how the networks actually have helped in the spread of this median duration pigeon pea, not only in that particular village but also in the surrounding villages in Akola and other districts. And this is how a network architecture of the households or the individuals were growing pigeon pea variety. And you can see the blue bars are actually, the blue boxes are actually the upper caste, and the red ones are the nomadic tribes. Now these two groups were instrumental in bringing this new variety of Maruti into the village. And even in the absence of government support, this variety spread throughout the village and it was based on mostly on caste and kinship.
Avoid but intervene here. This is a network which reflects reality. The intervention of ICRISAT has come in this process.
Yeah.
And it was through the intervention of Chokde.
Yeah, he's not there, he's on travel.
In the next set of studies, we should be able to reflect that kind of intervention into that network. How does Chokde figure out there?
Yeah, Chopde is the triangle outside the village.
Okay, so that's in the discussion point.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Okay. So to conclude, because I can see that I'm running out of time, though I have many conclusions, I would just like to make 2 points over here. Is one, whom you know is more important in networks. When you are developing networks, when you are establishing relations, whom you know is more important than what you know, because through that person you can come to know many things. So rather than what you know, whom you know is very important in a network. And also the density of the network varies depending on several aspects, particularly the characteristics of the region, the characteristics of people, the kinds of relationships. Is it an open village or a closed village? What is leading to the village being open or closed? So you need to understand all that, and based on this only you can get the density of the network. And the last point is women in agriculture. They are more likely to use the informal networks, especially in agriculture, because they are the custodians of seed and they save the seed and keep it for the next generation, and they are the ones who transfer it to their daughters and for the generations to come. So this informal networks also are very important in spread of technology, in new knowledge, in getting new information and knowledge, and also improving the lives of the poor or the rural communities. So we should not ignore the informal networks and focus only on the formal networks. And the last conclusion that I want to make is that this is a purely sociological study, and this analysis still gives you an of what strategies you should make to help the vulnerable adopt to new technologies, adapt to the changing climate or the changing market regimes, and how they can improve and increase their resilience. It also helps us, it identifies the viable entry points for different kinds of intervention. You might have a different note for a health intervention, you might have a different entry point for an agricultural intervention. It also helps us to identify what is the media for collective action, what are the pathways of information flows and access to resources and services. And from a broader context of development, this kind of an analysis will actually help us to target where the linkages are weak or missing. It will also help us to understand the in and out migration of ideas and innovations, and on a very broader scale, the interactional infrastructure, what I call is the building, the leadership has to play an important role in bringing about shared values and visions so that the nation state as a whole benefits. And having said all this, now I would like to say where it is based on theoretical and analysis that I have presented the findings. The way we want to move forward in the strategic research in gender in the next few years is to look at what is the role of institutions in network building. Do we let institutions develop on their own, or what is the role of the institutions in helping and building the networks? Another is to use some more statistical tools because this was a sociological study. And the third important is study from a network perspective. I have listed a lot of topics, but migration is very important. And here I would just spend a minute here. Now, migration in these two villages, what I have a very interesting finding to tell you. In Aurepalle, you could see out migration. You could see people moving out of the village because of opportunities that are available outside the village. And these people who are migrating, they are bringing in remittances, they are bringing in new knowledge, they are bringing in new information, and the networks are strengthened, more networks are created, and the networks are affecting in development process. Kanzara, on the other hand, we have observed that there is also out-migration. There was out-migration in Kanzara, where about 35 to 40 Deshmukh households left the village. And once they left the village, the networks completely collapsed. So that's an interesting finding that I have, which I want to research further to see what does migration do to networks? Is it always helpful? And if it is not helpful, how can we use this kind of a finding to see what can be done, in that. So I want to do a little more research on network and then nutrition and food security. So I welcome you all for my next seminar, which I think I will present on gender and nutrition, again with a network perspective, so that you will get some more ideas, some more new information about nutrition, and then how these networks can actually help in improving the nutritional status of men, women, and children. So thank you all for such a patient listening, and I hope I did not keep it very long, and we still have time for questions and answers.
Thank you, Padma, and also inviting us. She already advertised her next seminar, which I think will be months from now, or even but we look forward to your next seminar, which will now move into focusing on the nutrition aspects of the work. Okay, now the floor is open for your questions. Thank you for this interesting discussion on your findings.
Okay.
Yes, I am collecting. Okay, raise your hands and I will sit down.
Nowadays we are listening that there is divide, social divide. Social divide even within these rural villages. So when it comes to the network of economic networks, that divide is still remaining same, or it is changing, meaning this social in terms of caste, and then when come in terms of this economic and other one, how it is moving.
Shall I respond, or we take you?
I think you can respond.
Yeah.
So that we can clearly see your feedback.
The social divide in the rural areas, I fully agree that it is still very strong in some villages. If you go to the interior villages, you can see it is still very strong. Even in our own steady villages where we have been observing since 30 years, you can see that in Aurepalle the divide, it's becoming, the gap is becoming less and less. But whereas in Kanzara, it still continues to hold strong in that village. Though we may say that it is slightly weakening, and then there is this, the gap is coming to narrow down, but it is not still, you can say that this divide, it has totally gone, or the class and class distinctions have totally disappeared. It is not the case. It still continues to be very strong. And that's why in the Kanzara analysis, in all my analysis, I could see that caste and kinship were the dominant factors, in the network formation, in the share of information, in the spread of information. So we cannot generalize saying that the social divide is becoming narrow and narrow, but then opportunities people are taking up the opportunities, and you can see in several instances that this class and class distinctions are gradually breaking down. But Aurepalle, which was once dominated by the Reddys, you can see that the decline, the breaking down of the class caste difference is very clear in Aurepalle. One of the reasons could be that there are fewer numbers of those people in the village itself. In Aurepalle, if you see, there is no Reddys now, hardly any Reddys except very few households. Whereas you can see the toddy tappers are more in numbers. So maybe because of the strength in numbers, the divide, you could see it is breaking down. But whereas in Kanzara, where you can still see the Deshmukhs continue to hold their sway, you can see that it is not happening so fast and easily.
Okay, of course, there are other factors like education. and access, which you can discuss later.
Yeah, no, but since you have mentioned education, I want to. But actually, if you see education also, again, that's a very interesting topic to research further. In Kanzara, if you see, Kanzara has always been, the literacy levels in Kanzara have always been higher than Aurepalle. Even now, from 75, if you see, you can see that the literacy levels are high. So then why is it that still the kinship networks hold so strong? Again, I think we cannot generalize that the kinship networks are strong always, but it could be for a particular kind of a transaction. Because you saw for the socio-cultural transactions, it was breaking down. But for technology related transactions, it was still very strong. The kinship was very strong. So the caste played a very important role in the spread of technology related information.
My question is related to what? Yeah, I'm Madhusudan. Uh, my question is also related. When you compare that Aurepalle and the Kanzara, it can be explained by livelihood perspective also. Because livelihood strategies and their activities are different. Kanzara is a farming. Farming is one sector. The non-farm sector is here more because close to the Hyderabad, other city, Tadi Table, carpenter, other working worker in city. So they have the vast network. That's why one of the reason is livelihood different. So why people form network to do something to sustain their livelihood. That's how the people form network connection. And so the nature of the livelihood, what they get their income, source of income for the livelihood, things that affect network everything. Yes. So one of the difference is because of that.
Yeah, I agree fully with you. And in fact, in my arguments, I have used what you have already said in some of my arguments, where I'm saying that here you can see diversification of livelihood options. You can see more sources of income, not only within the village, outside, moving from farm to non-farm, and that actually helps to get in more information. So the village no longer becomes a closed village; it becomes an open village, and people play different roles and functions. Within the village, they may have different functions. Outside the village, they play a different role, and that brings about. So that also affects network formation. I agree with you.
So the question now, in case of your Aurepalle, you saw the close that the moneylender, despite of the so much rise of the that self-help group, still it is the case.
Yes.
The moneylender have so power. How many moneylender? Only one moneylender, or 2, 3 are doing that. In case of Aurepalle, you saw a very close network, 1% type of thing holding.
No, I gave as an example of one person, but there are 2, 3 I think so in Aurepalle. 3 are continuing to be strong in Aurepalle. That's because of the transaction costs, I think so. See, even if they have to go to the bank, they need some paperwork to be done, they need collateral, they need somebody's help, they need time to go to the bank. All the transaction cost, is minimized when you go to a money lender who knows you very well and who stays in the village, and he's actually giving you links to the input dealer, to the traders. So, to avoid the transaction costs also, they go to the money. But that's what it's very surprising to me, that the money lender continues to be very strong. In fact, the women, when I was talking to them, they said when he goes on the road, they don't even want to see his face. They told it to me in Telugu. They don't want to see his face, but they have no option but to respect him, because he's the one who is the savior when it is dire. Especially like my health emergencies, you need 80,000 like that. From where do they get the money? So the money lender.
Yeah, first let me congratulate you. Excellent seminar, but the topic is very difficult to understand for a person like an entomologist like me. But while clarifying, you really gave very good clarity for a role of money lender in the social network. But still I have a couple of doubts. Maybe I will try to attend your next seminar also. You said network lens, which I couldn't understand. Are going to see through something like GIS mapping, or maybe some modeling like Dr. Pera Singh. Another thing you mentioned about migration, and Deshmukh migrated from Kanzara, and then village became deserted, and I can see that migration in ICRISAT families also. Maybe after 10 years, most of us become maybe orphans. And you also mentioned education and development. Do you think that education has a positive role in development or negative role? Particularly if I look at my village, the education level, and then people migrated to US, is maybe the first village in Andhra Pradesh, but the development is maybe the last village in Andhra Pradesh. How you see that type of relationship?
Okay. That's a very interesting one. And lot of issues. First of all, the network lens. Now, what I mean by the network lens is, you're always looking at you're saying income, class, land holding class, you're only looking at that, but you're not looking at any effect of the outcome, looking at a point of seeing what are the kind of relationships. Why are people behaving the way they do? Why are they adopting a technology or not adopting a technology? Even though the technology is very good, they have all the enabling environments also sometime. But then because of one constraint, and that is the relationships, the structure of the social structure in that village, maybe that is limiting adoption or disadoption of a technology. So that's what I meant when I said let us look at it from that lens also, so that we get a more holistic understanding of why adoption is happening or why disadoption is taking. It might not be that technology itself, it might not be that the technology is not suitable for that region, it is suitable for the region, but because of this, the structure, the way the relationships in a society, in that particular society is organized, maybe the uptake is not happening. So my point was to say let us look at from that angle also to understand technology adoption, diffusion, new knowledge, innovation, etc. So not to forget that people are there and they have different kinds of relationships. They are not independent, but they are interdependent, and for each individual the links may be having different meanings and consequences. So let us not totally ignore that fact. Then second, on migration, your migration, education and development actually kind of go together. When I said in Kanzara, the Deshmukh households migrated for the education of their children, they had no links back to the village. And that's why the network collapsed. But in Aurepalle, you could see the remittances and the people coming back and, giving them new ideas, bringing about a change, the attitudinal change that, you could see in the people. One of the reasons was this new knowledge was coming from outside. So whether education is good or bad for development, I would say it is good for development. It is definitely good for development. Actually, educational investments and improvements in education have actually made India progress. But then you can see that is what, again, you have to look at it from a perspective of what it means to the individual, what it means to the household, and what are his, I put it as interactional infrastructure, a big term I use from sociology, but that's what the shared vision, your goals, whether we have that, it depends on that. But definitely education, I feel, is positive for growth. We need education for growth and development.
Okay, this leads to perhaps more scrutiny, Padma. But if you just think about this, Padma used the term which is in the literature right now, which is network analysis and network lenses. But really, if you look at it, you have, and if you are able to look at not only 2 villages, but you have a whole range of 42 villages in the end, then you can see that there are, it is the social interaction, but really more on the collectiveness and the connectedness of the people within the village. So we have seen villages wherein group action, the people jumps into group action immediately when there are opportunities. But there are villages where they even fight with each other and then don't cooperate with each other. So there is this this concept of group action, which is important in technology innovation, in technology adoption, which we have in our previous studies identified as a constraint. I think it's a linkage of that, whereby if we are, before we just called it group action, and we noted that as a main constraint in adoption of NRM technologies, because they need information, they need to coordinate with each other and connect with each other to be able to adopt the technology. So I think it is here that the term can then be analyzed in more systematic way using this network concept, which has now been formalized in the literature.
Yeah.
Nagesharam.
The way the networks help to spread the adoption of Maruti 863. Similarly, in Andhra Pradesh, Aurepalle, we have the best example of self-help groups. Yes. How this government has played, an important role to create wider, create groups plus supporting to get some fund, to give some fund for creation of revolving fund, so that they will get lower rate of interest. That's and when we were in the village, and earlier when we were there in the villages, 80s. That time, number of the money lenders were there. But over the period, this farmer credit is also dominated. Earlier, once they want to go to banks, they have to go all the way to Kalakurti, about 25 kilometers or 30 kilometers. Later, it has come to the stage of Amangas, about 10 kilometers. Now, within 2 kilometers, they have the access of cooperative societies, plus Krushi, KVKs, Krushi banks, some local banks. So, like that, they have the access of farmer credit sources and these TVs. When we are there, we don't get not even single newspaper. Nowadays, and politically, even within the people also, they have the more of awareness. Yes. Political awareness has come. Yes. In government also, they give a lot of support. To reserve 50% of local bodies, yes. Plus their representation and other things. So,
yeah, I agree. And also in this study, we have also seen how the government support, because of the government support, you could see that the self-help groups were very successful in Aurepalle. There's the same in Kanzara, because there was no government support, the kinship networks evolved. So you can see that,
varies from
state to state. So it depends. So you need to understand it from the context. So you can't just generalize it, but then it is, you have to understand it based on the context in which. Okay. No, for recording purpose they need it.
I have one question that I will say later, but first let me congratulate you on a very fine presentation. Not for a moment did I feel sleepy or anything like that, so that was good. My question as a woman, all the gentlemen spoke here, but I am speaking now from a woman's perspective. Do you find networking more common among women because they are not so powerful? Or is it equally about the same for men and women? Generally what happens is women are powerless in a rural setting especially. So do they network and get more strength out of it or more information?
Yeah.
That's my question.
The best example is the formation of SHG. The very first time that these women came together, that itself was a big achievement for them, and that itself was a big source of power for them. By power it may not be political power or money power, but that is the informal power they have. So yes, networking does help them to improve their position in the households and in the society, and they do get power. So also for men, I feel, but more, for women, you need women to come together, because all these years they were never able to come together, and now here is an opportunity that they can come together, they can meet, they can discuss, they can share information, learn new things, and that's why it brings to them some kind of a power to them. Again, I say it is informal power here. Yeah.
It is definitely informal power, because we hear of women elected as sarpanchas of villages, and the men, their husbands are actually running the show. So, where is the power? Still, we have a long way to go.
Yes, we have a long way to go.
Okay, 3 o'clock has come. I can see that there are still sparks of interest, but I would like to thank Padma. It was a wonderful